So, there was a lot in our email traffic back and forth about what to talk about. So I put a bunch of stuff in and then deleted a bunch of stuff to try and fit it in an hour. And so I'm going to keep it fairly high level. And if there's any questions, comments, let's just keep it informal and ask them. So basically, we use the term coherence a lot, and I think that's probably pretty familiar to all of you. But in our context, we're using it in the context of like it would be used in physics and science to describe the behavior of a more complex system, whether it's us as human beings or social systems, or as we'll see, the global environment. And a little history there. We started looking at physiology and found that different systems literally entrain and synchronize, but we needed a broader concept for what we were finding in the work, and that ended up being coherence, because it implies that the parts of a system have to be interconnected, that there has to be connectedness and linkage between the parts of the system. And of course, in a more coherent system, that means that those elements of a system are working more together in a harmonious way, that is energy efficient. And another better concept within coherence is typically that the output of a system is greater than the sum of the parts, right? So it was a perfect term for the work we were doing. I'm going back to the early 1990s now. And so we use coherence in this concept in three main spheres or domains: personal coherence, which we spent many, many years really investigating, more recently, social and global, which I won't get a lot into, but a little bit on the social. So I thought I'd just give a quick background on the personal coherence. And I would usually end with this, but I'm going to start with it, that personal coherence is an optimal state in which the mind and emotions are brought into alignment and in sync with the energetic heart's intuitive guidance. And so that's really kind of how I see that. And but there's a lot of being in this physiologically coherent state, as we originally called it. There's 400 plus independent studies now showing that this is a very good state to learn how to be in and to operate from, in terms of health, well-being, recovering from disease, performing better, so on. So we know that when we're in this more coherent state, there's a lot of biochemical changes that occur, hormonal balance, immune functions improved, and so on. So I'm not going to go into all of that because I don't think that's that much of interest. But one kind of a key concept that's new for a lot of people, I find, even in some of the psychophysiology communities, is that it's really this is a key aspect of coherence, is synchronization. And it's ultimately the brain's ability to synchronize its own electrical activity that underlies our capacity to even be conscious and awake, right? Or let alone to perform well, to perceive, focus, and so on. So, these days, like in EEG work, it's relevant, but I don't care so much about how much alpha activity a person has or theta. It's really the synchronization within the different aspects of the brain and nervous system and body, as we'll see, that really counts. It underlies our ability to be in higher vibrational states and perform well. So I'm just going to kind of trying to do a quick background overview of some of our earlier work, and start here with the second statement that this is still surprising to a lot of people, but I think it's getting out there more now, that the heart sends far more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. And that might sound like some new discovery. It's not. This has been known since the late 1800s. Basic anatomy. Actually, a lot of the European original neuroanatomists and stuff knew this. In fact, psychology was based on it. William James, for example, was very aware of this kind of information in early years. And then the pendulum swung back to it's all about the brain, in the late 1920s and 1930s. That paradigm shifted really again in the 1970s, or starting in the early 70s, when it was discovered that the heart had a causal role in modulating brain function and perception. And this was quite the big deal back then. And I mean, these days, most people are, inside my community, psychophysiology, are fairly aware of this. And so basically we know that the patterns, I'm going to call it here, or the quality of the neural signals that the heart is sending through these afferent or sending neural pathways, they go to almost every major brain center. And they have profound affections on brain function, our perception of the world, our emotional experience, our capacity to self-regulate. And two terms were introduced back then in the 70s to describe the effects that the neural activity of the heart was having on brain function. And those terms are cortical inhibition and cortical facilitation. But the mechanisms weren't clearly understood, and there was a hypothesis put forward, and it ended up not being quite right, but was generally right. What they didn't know then was that the heart literally has its own intrinsic, technically called the intrinsic cardiac nervous system, nicknamed the heart brain, not by me, but by the neurocardiology community, who actually studies the nervous system in the heart. And it has all the types of neurons and the way they're all interconnected to literally say it's a functional brain. Neuroplasticity, neurogenesis, long-term memory, short-term memory, all of these functions have been proven to exist in the intrinsic heart's intrinsic cardiac nervous system. And I'm be very rounded off here in kind of high-level statements, but this is where our work came in the early 90s. We started studying our lab, psychophysiology lab, really started out by looking at the physiological correlates of emotions. And we looked at a lot of different things, in those years. And in fact, I just submitted a paper yesterday on the early history I was asked to write of this work. And we basically, what we found was that of all the physiological stuff we were looking at, about everything you could think of, of course, EEGs and EMGs and so on, that it was actually the rhythmic pattern of the heart that was most reflective of a person's emotional state in real time. It's called heart rate variability. I'm not going to go into the background of that just for the sake of time. But in other words, our heart rate changes with each and every heartbeat, or the time between each consecutive pair of heartbeats is always changing. So if that were the same, we would have no heart rhythm, right? It'd be a flat line, these graphs you're seeing now. So this is beat to beat change in heart rate you're seeing here. And typically when a person's feeling, and that's the key word, thinking doesn't do so much, things like frustration or impatience or anxiety or feelings of overwhelm and so on, the way that's reflected in our physiology is this kind of more chaotic or what we now call incoherent looking heart rhythm. And this is quite literally reflecting a lack of neural synchronization within the higher brain systems and within the activity in our autonomic nervous system. And when people are feeling things like kindness or appreciation, compassion, these types of things, what we found was the heart literally shifted into a completely different, you could say, functional mode. And that's the rhythm you see on the right here, which we call a coherent rhythm. So you can see this nice high variability in a much more ordered way. So keep in mind, each one of those cycles or sine wave cycles, there's probably 20 heartbeats that went on. So you're seeing a series of heart rate accelerations and deaccelerations that are ordered over time. And this is reflecting not only that the activity in our brain and nervous system is more in sync, which it is, but we've actually flipped into another mode where many rhythms within the body are literally coming into entrainment. They're frequency entrained at the same rhythm. So this is things like blood pressure rhythms, respiratory rhythms, heart rhythms, craniosacral rhythms, even DC potentials across the brain are all coming into this frequency entrained state. So there's a lot going on. We could do a whole hour just on what all's going on, but I'm obviously not going to do that. So in other words, emotions is reflected in the patterns of the rhythms of the heart. And some of my other friends have gone on to show, just from looking at heart rate variability patterns, you can, with machine learning approaches, have about 75% accuracy in discrete emotional state detection of what somebody's feeling. So as I mentioned, when you're in that, another aspect of when you're in that heart coherent state is heart-brain synchronization also increases. And just looking normally at EEG and ECG, so the very bottom trace on here is the ECG, and I've just put vertical lines with each heartbeat, R wave. You can actually see in the EEG data that the neural activity is largely synchronized to the cardiac cycle, right? You can see the alpha here. And interestingly, you can even see brainwave state changes going on between heartbeats. And it's really, I mean, you can actually see it in the raw data, but that actually can be quantified. I won't go into all the details. So this is a group of about 30 people, just kind of a resting baseline state. And then when they're in that coherent rhythm. Simply said, the more red, the more in sync the heart-brain neural activity is. So you can see it's a highly significant effect. Just by getting into heart coherence, we were also increasing neural synchronization between the heart and brain and within the brain as well. Okay, so that's just I thought I'd start with some high-level personal coherence. And you had asked me to talk about intuition, so I thought I'd throw this in. So what our work suggests is there are basically 3 types of intuition. This is at least what I publish. Implicit knowledge. This is the one that's safe to study in academic settings, right? Or implicit learning, it's sometimes called. And this is the type of what we would often call intuition that's really based on implicit past memories where we've learned something and didn't know we learned it or forgot we learned it. And, it's also called dual process theory in the neurosciences. But basically the brain, we're always comparing and pattern matching to the implicit or unconscious memories, and we get a match and aha, that's the intuition. Expert knowledge kind of grows out of this type of intuition, as it's often called. Many examples, but like the nurse is a common one who walks into a patient's room. A nurse that's been around a while, right? And says, this patient's going to code in the next hour or so, and usually right. And you ask her, well, how do you know that? And she goes, I don't know. I just know it, and there might be another newer nurse next to her. It's like, how do you know that, right? So it's just where we've learned those associations implicitly over time. It's a really important part of intuition. One of the problems with it is, though, it can be wrong as often as it's right, because we're comparing the now to a past association, and that's sometimes the context can be different enough that we make a mistake there. Many examples, but for the sake of time, I'm going to keep it that simple. Energetic sensitivity is my second category, and this has to do with our nervous system's capacity to detect and respond in a measurable way to real signals of various types from the environment. Yeah, like I would put empathy in this category, and that'll maybe make more sense in a few minutes. Where you feel somebody staring at you, right? And you turn around and sure enough, they are. Maren Slitt's done a couple of studies to show that that's actually a real phenomena. Or there are people, for another example, can feel earthquakes coming. We now know we can measure changes in the Earth's magnetic field prior to earthquakes. So there's no question that our nervous system is sensitive to magnetic fields. From my perspective, I'll show you some data on that as well. Then non-local is my favorite, and the kind we study most over the last few years. And that's, of course, the type of intuition you can't write off to the other 2 types. It usually has to do with intuitions across time or space, great distances or across time. Probably pretty familiar to you guys. Many examples. I don't have to go through examples for this group. So we did a series of studies looking at non-local intuition, and I'm not going to go through all the gory details, but these are very rigorous lab-based studies, all published if you want to know all that. And so basically we're looking at like EEG, ECGs, skin conductance, and a few other measures in the lab. And I'll show you a little bit more detail on this, but basically what these studies found that is sometimes if a future event is emotionally relevant, and that is key to this. Actually, it has to be something we care about, something that we're then the heart produces a neural signal that pre-alerts the brain, actually, or you, before the event takes place. So this is a type of an intuitive intelligence that really bypasses and reacts faster than normal cognitive processes and thought processes. So the first series of studies we did on this, basically the person's sitting at a computer screen, they press a button, see a blank screen. Meanwhile, we're recording all the data. And then after that, the computer randomly selects a photograph that it shows the person from the two opposite ends of the international effective picture set. Really yucky pictures or calm, bunny rabbits and nature scenes and things like that. Then you see the picture for 3 seconds, and then you have a washout period before you do that. And each participant does that many times. So basically, the data has been recorded before anybody can know what that future picture is going to be. Even the computer doesn't know, right? And okay, so basically what these studies find is if you look at the skin conductance, which is the green and the, I guess, what is that kind of pink line on there? 0 on the bottom axis is where you first see the picture. And what we'd actually expected to see for the skin conductance, actually based on some studies Dean Radin had done, you all know Dean probably, was that there would be a significant difference in skin conductance. We didn't see that. And I'll tell you a little behind the scenes story I don't normally go into, because Dean had come down, he'd told us about the experiment he'd done using the pictures. I mean, this is pretty cool. But he didn't look at he didn't have EEG and all the stuff we were looking at that time in our extended study. And so, we did this with 30 people twice, by the way, this experiment. The first time we did it, once in a coherent state before going through the protocol and once in a normal state. So, a lot of hours, hundreds of hours had gone into this point. So we looked at the skin conductance first and went, oh no, we are failing to replicate Dean's experiment. Which we had in that case. So we then went on to finish looking at our, the next step, our analysis, which is the heart rate variability, the beat to beat change in heart rate. That's the red and blue line on the bottom. And so now we're seeing a huge pre-stimulus response, highly significant, actually way more than what Dean had even found in skin conductance. The red line being if the future picture was going to be one of the negative pictures, in the blue if it was a calm picture. So we showed this to Dean at that point, just to let him know what we were finding. And Dean, it was funny. Dean says, "Oh, gee, I forgot to mention. We screen. We make sure we don't have any meditators or people that have a lot of practice in these techniques because they don't have a skin conductance response." And we're like, Dean, we screened 4 people that had that because we wanted them to be coherent. So anyway, kind of a fun behind the scenes story there of what happened. And so we went on to actually explain, I think, why that's true. And now this is looking at some of the EEG data. This is evoked potentials we're looking at now in the top 2 rows. The topographical maps of evoked potential data. And basically so 0 is when you see the picture over on the far right-hand side of this. So now we're looking in the pre-stimulus period, and around, that 4.5 seconds before you see the picture is where if you look between the calm and emotional rows, that kind of red stuff there in the map is where you first start seeing any indication or significant indication of a pre-stimulus response in the brain. But the heart rhythms are diverging a couple of seconds before that. So this was intriguing. So we then went, which I'm not going to show you all this because it'd get too long and too complex to get into, but we then looked at that period using what are called heartbeat evoked potentials, where you can literally trace the afferent neural information from the heart through the brain. It goes here, both spatially and temporally through the different brain systems or areas. And what we basically found was that the heart was indeed the first to respond to this information, sent a measurably different, highly significantly different, it wasn't subtle, different neural signal to the brain, and you saw a brain response. Then you saw a body response, like a change in skin conductance and so on, if in those cases. So the real flow of information was heart, brain, body, then conscious perception, if you're paying attention. Okay. And we also found, just some background on that, in the group when they were in a coherent state prior to going through this protocol, that was afferent channel was highly different. I mean, it was, again, not a subtle thing. So that when we're in that coherent state, we're in a much more intuitive mode. The signals get to the brain in a much stronger way. Hopefully that made sense. There were some problems with that protocol in that it wasn't something we could use with kids, for example, children. You know, you got these yucky pictures of bad guys with knives at a woman's throat and snake striking and things like that. And there were also some of the participants that, you know, would have very different reactions to the same image. You know, if you're an EMT, for example, a car wreck and stuff, it's not a big deal. And I should note that on all of these studies show that the magnitude of the pre-stimulus response is significantly correlated to the magnitude of the post-stimulus response when you actually see the image. In other words, if it's not something that we get a ugh about in the post, you don't have a pre-stimulus. So that's why I can say it's something we have to care about. There has to be an emotional connection. So anyway, to try and solve some of that, we developed basically a roulette-based protocol, gambling protocol, and made it fun. People got to bet real money and, you know, win money and all that, so that they had some care about it. And now we have, in this case, 2 pre-stimulus periods: before you place your bet and after you place your bet, before you know the result. And so, long story short, consistently, this in this particular study, we did the same group of people, I think 8 times over a few months, and we did them in full moon and new moon period just for fun. And but basically, these are the grand averages. You see, it's consistently the heart that is what predicts the future. Skin conductance, EEG measures just don't do it. So this has been kind of uniformly, many studies have now shown this. But here we had our 2 pre-stimulus periods. So again, it's the same results, pre-stimulus in both pre-stimulus periods. So in this case, we're seeing the 20 seconds before the result rather than 6 in the previous studies, and so on. And by the way, there was a full moon effect. During full moons, they won more money and you had a stronger signal. So it might be interesting to some of you in that study. So basically, this, the conclusions of all this was that suggest that the heart has access, and brain too, but to a field of information not limited by the boundaries of time and space. And so that's the way I got it originally published. Now I'm a little more out of the closet by saying that what we think about what is the field of information outside the boundaries of time and space. Well, many have called the spiritual heart over millennia. I used more of the term energetic heart, and I'm just suggesting that that's a real thing, and with real structure. And so that, which of course is the most common thread, if you will, or through all the great religions and philosophies, really from, as far as we can go back in history, the idea of the heart being the point of access to our higher capacities, wisdom and courage and so on. So this is some pretty cool research actually that actually suggests they've been right all along. And as we get in a more coherent state, which naturally occurs when we're more loving, more caring, more compassionate, that naturally takes us into that more coherent state. We are more connected with what we call our heart's intuitive intelligence, which then helps us navigate life with more kindness and compassion and ease and so on. Okay, so the kind of actually early on in our work, we were interested in the energetic aspects of all this. And, when you measure the heartbeat or the EEG, we put electrodes in the body. What is literally being measured is current flow. I mean, you're using differential amplifiers and amplifying and measuring the flow of current. But of course, physics 101, whenever we have a flow of current, you create a magnetic field. And magnetic fields and electric fields are quite different animals, so to speak. And one of the properties of magnetic fields is they go through things. That's why cell phones work indoors. It's the magnetic component. I used to be an engineer for Motorola, by the way, so something I know a little bit about from my previous field. So, we're very familiar with using electromagnetic fields to carry information, right? All radios, transmitters work on this principle. And as it turns out, we're the same way, and so the magnetic field of the heart is easily radiates outside the body and can be measured externally to the body. And how do I know that? Well, I can put a magnetometer out here and measure it, right? This is not like an aura, much harder to do photons and things, but, and it was actually, sure.
Yeah, hi. And how strong is the magnetic field?
It's measured in picoteslas.
And where is it, how far is it picotesla?
Okay,
how
so
from the center of the body do you have the pico?
Yeah, well,
you understand my question?
Okay, let me.
You get a weaker field.
Yeah, I mean, it's a relatively small. I mean, if you're comparing it to the Earth's magnetic field or something, it's quite small. But with a squid-based magnetometer, you can, if you start backing up from the body, you lose the capacity to detect the field about 3 feet, or that's a little over a meter from the body. That doesn't mean that's how far the field goes. That's just the sensitivity of our current magnetometers. Now, to compare that to a brainwave, which you can also measure externally to the body, you lose the capacity to detect it about 1 inch away from the skull. So 3 feet versus 1 inch. So clearly at the energetic level, the heart's the big player. Now, you know, theoretically, magnetic fields, they just fall off at the square of the distance or the cube of the distance. They just keep getting weaker, but they keep going. It's not like they ever stop until they terminate on a magnetically polarized material.
So which is the smallest level? Is that picotesla, or how much can you really measure?
Okay, I'm not sure I understand that.
You said it's picotesla.
You measure it in what are called picoteslas, yeah.
And that is the outer limit. It's a meter away. It's picotesla. I guess you have this gradient. And which is the weakest?
Well, you could go nanoteslas, things like that would be, you know, are measurable. Yeah. I don't know I hope I've answered your question. I don't know if I have or not, but.
Yeah, I see if I can make it clearer. I will think about it.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So basically, you can think of, you know, the magnetic fields in this case as our personal field environment, and so when we do spectral analysis of that field, you actually see that the spectral patterns are reflecting emotional information, or carrying that information, and we can actually measure this. This was actually an amazingly easy thing to show. I was actually shocked when we first did this and published it. I did a lot of searching and found nobody had actually ever thought to look at this before. So this is what basically the information patterns is what I think of in vibro, that are being carried by the field, just like any other transmitter would be. So you can see they're quite different: appreciation versus anger, and so on. And as it turns out, the primary thing that determines the structure of the spectra in the magnetic field, it ties directly back to the beat-to-beat change in the series of heartbeats. So you don't have to have, you know, very expensive magnetometers. If you know what the heart rate variability is and know the relationship, you can know exactly what's being the information that is being radiated in the magnetic field. So this has just been a popular thing. Josh is my son, actually. He was 12 years old here. He's 36 now, so it gives you an idea how long ago this was done. And his dog Mabel. And so this is not really a big research project, but it was just a fun thing to do. We could, you know, bring your dog over to the lab. So we put recorders on, HRV recorders on Josh and his dog, and did an experiment where Mabel, who's on the bottom, on the top, the dog, is running around in one of the labs. So she was sniffing around, having a good time, because that's normally off limits. And then Josh, who's on the bottom, his HRV rhythms, he was asked to go. He actually went into the same room, but made no physical contact, no, you know, like talking to her, just go in quietly, sit down, and use one of the heart math techniques called the heart lock-ins. Kind of, you could think of that as a heart-focused meditation, where you shift into coherence and really consciously radiate love and appreciation to others, and that's the essence of it. And so he went into a fairly coherent heart rhythm, which is nice to see at 12 years old. But then you see what happened to the dog on top, made a pretty dramatic shift. And Josh leaves the room, and Mabel wasn't happy about that. And this is actually a really easy experiment to replicate. In fact, we've been working with hundreds of dogs, and we have a project right now with Purina where we're working to help them develop a human dog bonding device so we've been working with their recording many dogs, and so dogs are very sensitive, and horses as well. We've also done this with horses, and also rabbits are pretty especially horses and dogs are very kind of responsive to humans that they're attached, that they're connected with, have a relationship with. Now, this is again early back in the 90s work, but I thought would be of interest to you guys. Now here we're looking at heart-brain synchronization between two different people. And in this case, they're about 4 feet apart. So that's a foot farther than you can measure the magnetic field. And you can put barriers in between them. So there's no visible, any kind of put headphones on them, all that kind of stuff. None of that matters. And what this is using an evoked potential approach to see this. And so the red is the ECG, signal averaged ECG of one of the participants, and the blue is the brainwave of another. And so what you actually see here is the EEG of one person synchronizing to the hearts of the other person. And interestingly, this always happens almost always happens in one direction. Sometimes in about 30% of the cases, you would see it happening both ways. Right. So I hope that made sense. And interestingly, this one of the techniques we teach in our courses is called coherent communication, where you really get people trying to get into that coherent state while you're talking and listening. And I originally, when we first did these experiments, was predicting or thinking that if let's say I am the coherent one, I am all coherent, I am radiating coherent fields, the all-powerful one, people will synchronize to me, right? Ended up being exactly the opposite. In other words, when we're in a coherent state, we're more stable and we're more likely to synchronize to the other person. So we're really tuning to I'll call it the energetic information. So what we see when people actually use this technique in the real world, in communication and stuff, is that they're more stable in terms of their own emotional stability, but they're now able to detect what the unsaid, unspoken energies of the other person, and actually articulate that back to the other person, what they're really feeling, what's really going on in their world at a much deeper level. So it's kind of opening an intuitive channel between people. It's a very powerful technique to actually see that happen between people, and to actually have data like this that says, hey, there's a real synchronization that's going on when that's occurring here. So I don't call it telepathy, but it kind of is in a way. I think even deeper level of it. Similar process using mothers and babies, and we see moms' brainwaves synchronizing to their baby's heartbeats. These are, again, not all these are non-contact, experiments with no physical contact. And interestingly, it's the attention that mom is paying to the baby matters. If you distract her attention, she starts thinking about other things. The synchronization goes away, which is an important aspect of this to show that it's not just attention matters. Very briefly, this was an experiment. It was actually kind of one of my favorite ones. It goes back to the 90s as well. It was a PhD project for a student, and basically had 40 people, and had in groups of 4 around a table monitoring them. And 3 of the 4 were taught how to get coherent 2 weeks before the experiment. And the 4th person at each of the tables, 10 groups, 40 people. The 4th person at each of the groups was naive to the real purpose of the experiment. And I won't go through it. It was a very well done study, like a lot of different steps and controls in it. Basically, when the 3 trained people were signaled to shift into coherence in a way that the other person didn't have any clue what was going on, there was overall, not every case every time, but overall a pretty strong effect size that the naive person was lifted into a measurably more coherent state. So again, kind of showing that field environment we're talking about, and when we're more coherent in it, that it can lift others into a more coherent state. And now taking that another step of looking at synchronization. This is a study we did here. It was 20 people in a room at the same time, might be all being monitored at the same time. And again, I'm not going to go through all the steps of the protocol, but there were different phases. And in one phase, which is what I'm showing you here, we in a way paired them up. In other words, I would be doing this heart lock-in technique, but when I say pairing, I would say, okay, I'm going to send my love and appreciation to Alf, and Alf is going to send it to me. Pairing like that out of the 20. And that was this phase of the experiment. And these, I never cease to be amazed by some of our own results. But so on the left is the actual HRB rhythms, and on the right is the spectrums, the power spectrums. The degree of synchronization that in this phase, this is far more synchronous in this phase than any of the other phases of the experiment. So I can honestly say this, and another experiment I'll show you next is that love is what connects us. It's what, yeah, because when we, from my perspective, when things synchronize, there's linkage. They have to be linked somehow, right? So there's this linkage occurring that we literally come into in this case, frequency synchronization. Yeah, you just don't expect to see this kind of stuff. I know this is from a friend of mine, colleague in the UK, England, Peter Granger, who's a couples therapist, who's using some of our devices and looking at husbands and wives. So, and he's doing training to help get them coherent and in sync. But then he got the idea of, I wonder if this works non-locally. So this is a husband and wife in two different buildings, but on the same property, about 80 feet apart, or 25 meters. And basically what there's lots of control data. I'm not going to bore you with all that, but basically when we're instructed to feel love and appreciation for each other, you see this occurring, this, again, amazing degree of synchronization. And trust me, you just don't see rhythms coming looking like this normally. You just, even if we're in the same room together. Now, then he took it to the next step of 8,000 kilometers away. So this was another couple, one in the US and one in the UK, doing the same thing. Now, what is totally amazing to me, we're starting to replicate some of this stuff, so I'm comfortable talking about it, that it's real, is that these experiments appear to even work if only one of the pair is participating. You follow what I mean? In other words, say the wife doesn't know, she's wearing the device, but doesn't know when the husband is going to be sending the love and appreciation. They still come into sync, which I would not have predicted. But that's what the data is suggesting. And that's in all of these studies I've been talking about, by the way, the one consistent thing is that you have to have a positive emotional connection for synchronization to occur. Even back to that first one with the 40 people, there was a significant relationship. He also looked at synchronization. So it's really, I'll say it again, love is what connects us, whether we're studying next to each other or thousands of miles apart. So, okay, so now going to the global scale a little bit. So the GCI, which we started, I guess, about 14 years ago, or the Global Coherence Initiative, is a project. It's really about uniting people globally in more heart-focused love and compassion, with an intention to facilitate the shift in global consciousness from the instability and polarizations and separations we see now to one of more compassionate care and cooperation. And I envision a world with increasing peace. It's just time for us to move past wars and these types of things. And so just an overview, the kind of our high level suggestions here is that this is not it's very clear that we all live within a sea of electromagnetic fields. No question of that. The Earth's, I'm not talking about man-made fields. I'm talking about natural fields now. And so I'm suggesting that these natural fields we live within connect every living organism on the planet. That we're all connected to and interconnected through the field. So we're basically all living in this common vibrational field, and we're all contributing to it. Our own positive and negative vibrations, based on, our day-to-day thoughts, feelings, the interactions we're having with others. And oops, I don't know what happened there. And basically, if that's true, obviously we're not the first to suggest this, obviously, but crazy enough to see if we can't measure it. And so basically when large numbers of people come together, especially at the same time, but doesn't have to be, in a more heart-centered and coherent state, really intensely adding love and compassion to it generates a more coherent field environment that can help benefit others at a global level, because we're feeding that information into the global field. So if we're going to do that, we have to measure things. So I'll say metaphorically, it's like listening in on the heartbeat and brain rhythms of the earth. May not be a metaphor, but we'll keep it at that for now. So we're creating what we call the global coherence monitoring system. And these are ultra sensitive magnetometers. I think they're among the most sensitive in the world, that are specifically designed to measure the time varying aspects or the resonant frequencies in the Earth's fields. And so currently we've got them. This is not, I wish we didn't have to do this ourselves. This is not trivial. They're a real pain to do and quite expensive. And we currently have sites in Canada, here in Boulder Creek, where I live now, on our property here, Lithuania, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and New Zealand. And we would have had a couple more now if it hadn't been for COVID. But we got enough out there to have a pretty good sense of what's going on globally. This is what the site here in Boulder Creek looks like in California. The magnetometers are actually underground. You know, they're these big long things. So this may not be a new concept to any of you, but for a lot of the public, it is. But you know, back when we got to dump iron filings on glass plates back in science class, remember that? You know, when they put our magnet under it, that was all fun to play with them. And of course, the allows us to see the shape of the magnetic field, whether it's a bar magnet or a horseshoe, whatever, and play with them. But what I just want to remind us of is the iron filings line up in lines like this. Right. In addition to seeing the shape of the field, there are these lines called flux lines or magnetic field lines. So they are actually real things. And if we look at the geomagnetic field of the Earth, it's kind of what we're representing here. These are these field lines. Of course, the field lines of the Earth are really huge, right? They're going out into space thousands of miles. And it's, of course, an idealized picture of the Earth's field. What they didn't teach back in science class, at least I didn't learn it, is that, which was kind of amazing for me to have learned this a while back now, but is that magnetic field lines act like guitar strings or any stringed instrument. You can pluck them and they vibrate. Who would have thought, right? And they're technically called field line resonances. This is well known in the geomagnetic research world. So for me, it was putting dots together, right? And what's plucking the field lines of Earth is the solar wind coming by. You know, Earth's turning, solar wind rushing by at 1,000,000 miles per hour, and the sun's turning. So this complex interaction, but the strings are being plucked. And just like on a guitar, the tension on the string and its length determines its resonant frequency or its note. And when we made this is pretty cool. This is real data. This is not an artist drawing. This is actually data from a recent, about 5 years ago now. NASA put up the 5 satellites in low orbit just specifically to study the Earth's magnetic field. And so this is a really neat image of what the magnetic field of the Earth actually looks like. And from these satellites, and if you look closely, you can actually see the vibrating, the ringing of the field lines. It's very cool to actually see it. And when we measure these down on Earth with our magnetometers, we see that one of the primary resonant, it's not always there, but one of the primary more stable resonant frequencies of the field line resonances is a frequency of 0.1 hertz. But the whole bandwidth, the range of them all overlap human, autonomic, and cardiovascular system rhythms. Okay, so 0.1 hertz is particularly interesting because that is the same frequency as the human coherent heart rhythm, and most animals as well, when they're dogs, horses, and so on, when they're coherent. Pretty amazing when you think about it, that field line resonances, which is, all right, then the other kind of Earth magnetic rhythm that is of interest here is the Schuman resonances. And I'm assuming that these are familiar to most of you guys. That basically there's 8 of them, and they all overlap human brainwave frequencies. Now these weren't first measured until about 1960. So when the first really accurate recordings of the Schuman resonance happened. It's not that long ago, right? In most of our lifetimes. There's a lot yet to be understood. And in fact, we're sharing our data with MIT, our magnetometer data. And so they're really interested in the Schuman resonances. And we got a collaboration going on there for another reason. But when they were first measured, it was immediately recognized at 7.83 hertz, which is one of the lowest frequency of the Schumans, is the same frequency as, well, just right in the cutoff point between theta and alpha brainwaves. So all 8 we now know overlap human brainwaves. And just a quick note here, seems like about every 2 years, there's some social media wave that comes usually out of Russia, about the Schuman resonances are changing, right? The baseline frequency of Earth is changing. It's total nonsense. Trust me. We're monitoring it 24/7 globally. It is not changing. It's just really poor recording equipment. And there was the last one that came out. For the first time ever, we've measured Schumann frequencies around 30 hertz. And I'm going, no, they've been being measured since 1960. And anyway, so just be careful, falling into that trap if you see that. And we don't want the Schumann resonances to change, because that they are the frequency of the Schumans are completely controlled by the geometry of the cavity between the Earth and the bottom of the ionosphere. So if they're changing, it means the ionosphere is changing. And I really don't think that would be good for our health and wellness. And in fact, one of my mentors, Franz Hallberg, some of you might recognize that name, the late Franz Hallberg. He's the guy who coined the term circadian rhythm, and who's published many papers on the effects of solar and geomagnetics on circadian rhythms and heart rate, blood pressure, and so on. And I got to know him quite well. And he was basically he was pretty strong about suggesting in his later years that we have the biological rhythms we have because we evolved in the rhythms of the Earth, in the fields of the Earth. Makes pretty good sense to me, actually. And there's also studies that have shown that our brain waves do on a regular basis, so many times a minute, synchronize with the Schumans and so on. And as you'll see, we've been showing now that our heart rhythms are also synchronizing with the geomagnetic rhythms. This was a small study that we did, where we had the participants were wearing recorders that record heart rate variability. They're little small devices. I got to have one kind of like this. Have electrodes and you wear them, and for 24 hours at a time. Well, actually, we had the subjects wear them for a month. They're really neat little devices because you can get weeks of data, before you have to charge the batteries, and continuous data. And we really were one of our initial studies looking at to see if their autonomic, so HRV really reflects autonomic nervous system dynamics is really what it's after. So we were looking to see if we could correlate autonomic changes through HRV to solar and geomagnetic variables, right? Which we did. But the surprise came when we time synchronized the data, because these participants in this particular study were spread across the state of California. So some are quite literally in Southern California, some in Northern, some in Central. They don't know each other. Most of them are, they're going about their normal days for across a month, 30 days. So we time synchronized their HRV data. That's what you're seeing here, the black and kind of blue line, thinking, well, it's just going to be a noisy line, flat line. Why in the world would the beat to beat change in my heart rate have anything to do with somebody in literally hundreds of miles away that I don't even know, right? Well, that's not what we found. This clearly shows that the heart rhythms, or that's what we call slow wave now, which is a second discovery, this slower frequency and heart rate variability that had never been shown before, at least that I know of. They were synchronized as a group. And so the only thing that we could think of that explains that is if we're all synchronizing to an external signal, right, that we're all a part of, which our own hypothesis, the magnetic field. So that's the red line. The red line is the power of the resonant frequencies in the magnetic field that same time period. And then on the right is the spectrums, and you see that it's the same, right? So They're basically, again, frequency synchronized on to slow wave rhythm. So this is pretty cool, but you know, I showed it to all my colleagues, you know, jaw drops and, you know, all that kind of thing. And we were fortunate to get some funding and to repeat this on a larger scale. So we call it the International HRV Synchronization Study, where we had groups of 20 people in each group now in 5 countries. So a much larger study. And we've just published a few months ago, the first, a lot more publications will come out of this. Basically, this is our groups: New Zealand, Lithuania, California, Saudi Arabia, and also a group in the UK. And so now what we're looking at this level of scale, this is what's published in the paper, is how in sync are the group members in each group with the rhythms in the magnetic field over each 24-hour day. Okay, so now this particular study focused on an aspect where we organized it so that all the participants in all the groups at the same time did a 15-minute, that heart lock-in again, that exercise where you get coherent and radio. In this case, we were sending love and appreciation to each other in all the groups. The darker green bars is the synchronization at the group level with the magnetic field over the following 24 hours after that day of everybody doing that exercise. What you're seeing here is, again, I would never have predicted this. A synchronization, but we also looked at, by the way, synchronization among the group members in each group. So being in that heart coherent state, there was a significant increase in synchronization among the group members across all the groups, but also with the carryover, what I call a carryover effect, for being in this state, coherent state for 15 minutes, increased the synchronization over the next 24 hours with the Earth's magnetic field data. That's the green bars. I couldn't have thought this up, you know, ahead of time. We hadn't found it, but yeah, some other studies. We have a pretty strong partnership with two different groups at the University of Lithuania, and there's a new picture emerging here. Now, this is we published 2 papers. I should say they did. I get stuck on as an author because of our data, but where they've been looking at resting metabolic rate. In other words, how much energy does the body have to maintain basic life functions? This is what resting metabolic rate is, and all the ways they measure that. And what they found now in these actually 2 different studies, these are fairly large studies. There was like, I think, close to 395 subjects in this one over a 5-year period, that at times when the magnetic field, the resonant frequencies are stronger, resting metabolic rate decreases. The measures. In other words, the body, right down to the cellular level, is operating more efficiently, using less oxygen and so on. So it's another in a whole series of, I would say, findings that suggest that it's really good to be in sync with the Earth. Right? It's, I mean, it kind of, our common and intuitive sense would say that, but it's nice to start seeing the data, because there's so much of the past literature has really been, I think, given a different spin. As all researchers had to look at was what's called KP index, which is a measure of magnetic field disturbance. You know, we get hit with a solar flare and the fields are disturbed in hospital admissions. And that's very clear. We don't like disturbed fields, right? Hospital admissions go up, there's more traffic accidents, all these things. So there's kind of this general aura, if you will, of the field's out to get us, it's harmful. And what we're seeing by looking at healthy subjects in normal times is a very different picture. I won't go, a bunch of studies showing that. I just didn't have time to go through all that. So again, I think you're all familiar with obviously the Global Consciousness Project. I know Alf and Anders are on a team working with me to create it. So just briefly for this, I won't go through a lot of this, is Dr. Nelson has shown over the last almost 25 years now, that events that evoke a lot of attention and emotion are reflected in this global network of random number generators. This is, of course, the biggest effect on the terrorist attacks, the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Just 2 different views, and kind of interesting where you saw the data changing, you know, a few hours before the first attack, which is also seen in larger earthquakes as well. And, you know, some of the summary, you know, after 500 independent studies, you know, p-value of 10 to the minus 13th. I mean, we're in the trillion to one here, that this is a real effect. So we're pretty convinced that this is something. And what typically what Rogers found, Dr. Nielsen, that typically that the effect is proportional to the number of people engaged in the event, right? However, we're also seeing, and this is something we're looking a little bit more at now, is that small groups can also have a powerful effect if there's a coherent focus, right? And actually, I believe we get to prove this, that even smaller groups that are really coherent and focused can probably have larger effects on the global field than large numbers of people who are, kind of all over the place. And this is another organization that I'm actually a co-founder of. It's called the Global Coherence Pulse. And every third Saturday of the month, a lot of organizations have come together to invite our members or followers to all come together to pulse the planet with more love and compassion. And so they're like IONS and Joe Dispenza and Greg Braden and a very long list of different groups are all participating in this together, a big group in India and so on. So if you're not familiar with it, I would invite you to, let people know and get involved in the pulse to help pulse the planet with love and compassion. Website is globalcoherencepulse.org if you're interested, and I should have put the website on. But anyway, Roger's been tracking each pulse event for over about 1.5 years now. And basically we are seeing usually there's about 1,000 people that show up for them. And we're seeing consistently significant effects from even a small group like that on the GCP, well, I'm going to call GCP1 data. So here we're going back to June 2001. But Roger's been doing every one. And so the composites shows that so basically what love and compassion can change the world. Now, my favorite study that Roger's done, this is this one where he looked at the events over the 20-year period and then rated them for their level of love and compassion. So like global Earth days and peace days would be high love and compassion. We know that it's emotional events that move the network. So medium are things like World Cups, Super Bowls, a lot of emotion, but not necessarily a lot of love and compassion. And then low would be your terrorist attacks and school shootings and so on. And shown that the highest effect size is those events high in love and compassion. Close to my heart. So Roger has basically about 1.5 years ago came to me and said, hey, will you guys take over GCP? I tried to talk him out of it, said, what about so-and-so? No, it's got to be you. So we finally agreed to do it. So he's passing the torch over to us. And so I'm really quite honored to say. So we're currently designing GCP2, and Ulf and Anders are both part of that team. And thank you, Ulf. You've been really showing up with some really cool stuff, by the way. I really appreciate your contributions. And so we're really developing, spent about the last year really, saying, okay, what do we learn from GCP1? What do we want to do different? Let's just not do the same thing. What new technologies do we want to bring to bear? What new questions do we want to ask? Are there new hypotheses, new statistical approaches? Really just starting, I won't say starting from scratch, not that, but what can we do differently? So we meet every 2 weeks, the team, and we're in the process now of actually building the new network. We've gotten a long ways and have new. Our goal here is to have 1,000 devices, and I think at its highest point in GCP1 simultaneously was maybe a little over 100 devices at its highest point. So we're be 10 times the. And each of our RNGs actually has 4 RNGs built into it, so it's really 4,000 RNGs that'll be out there. And one of our team, Nakam, who's both Anders and Ulf know, has some analysis shown that the effect size is proportional to the number of devices. That's what you see on the right. So having this much larger expanded network, we hope to be able to have much greater sensitivity of detecting whatever's going on in the I'm going to call it the consciousness field. I know some that's debatable, but my intuition says it is a field effect. And so this is what the boards look like for the new devices. So they're pretty cool. They kind of look like little spaceships. And I won't go through all this. But and another thing that we're doing quite differently, or that we can do now that Roger couldn't have done back 20 years ago, is tracking all the signals through every stage of the process. So actually quantifying the quantum noise coming right off the diodes and through all the different stages of the whitening and so on, and in hopes that we can really maybe get over time at more the mechanisms of what's going on. Where's the effect really happening? And so that's a goal. Whether we'll, consciousness has its own way. So whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. But if anybody's interested in hosting a device, in what we're calling the citizen scientist, there is heartmath.org/GCP2 center. Just let us know. And when they're available, we'll let you know for those that might want to host a device. They probably won't be ready for global distribution until they're saying August, but it's probably going to be more like September. But love to invite you to be involved. And let's go. All right, just the last thing I wanted to share with you is also involved in the global interconnectivity work is a project we're really just now releasing globally. And this is a project to measure the electrical activity of tree potentials. And this was one of those projects that was a lot harder to actually pull off than I thought it would be. Had I known, I probably wouldn't have done it. I thought it would take a year. It took 5 years to really get the system working. So this is the electrical potentials of 2 trees here on our property. We're in the redwoods, so a big redwood and an oak tree. And so as you can see, the trees have circadian rhythms and fairly dynamic electrical lives. And notice that this is in millivolts, the scale on this. So when we put electrodes in trees, just about yay far apart, you're recording millivolts level signals. And this is similar to the same scale you measure human heartbeats in terms of electrocardiograms. They're huge. I've asked a few, over the years, plant physiologists and stuff, how do trees create millivolt level signals like this? And I have yet to get an answer. My suspicion is it's the water. In fact, we already have evidence that the water is directly related to this. And some of you, this is my own intuition. I don't know this for a fact, but one of the things I suspect that we'll be able to eventually figure out is, you might know Jerry Pollack's work on four phase of water. If not, it's really worth learning about. But I think this is probably certainly an aspect, if not explains a lot of how we're seeing these voltages in trees. Basically what the system does is you have a little, we call it remote tree unit, the little sensor that goes out on your tree and the electrodes, and then that sends a radio link back to a base station in a person's home or business, wherever, which then connects to Wi-Fi to your internet. It's back to the database, where you can then go see what your tree is doing and all the other trees that are part of the network around the world. And so our key questions are trees affected by human emotions? And a lot of lessons learned from GCP here, a lot of the trees, in this case, sensors, over a lot of time, a lot of events, and we start pulling those signals out at a global level. That's kind of related. And then interestingly, can trees help predict earthquakes? That might sound kind of crazy. Another one of our collaborators and actually close friends is a guy named Friedemann Fruid, who's just over the hill from us at NASA and SETI, his affiliations with both. And he's I think of him as the grandfather of pre-earthquake signal research. And in short, he's developed, he's a chemist, a new model that previously not understood of how rocks are under pressure, like in a fault zone, they turn into batteries. And this is a new mechanism, not like piezoelectric effects. These are sustained currents that travel through the earth and up to the surface, and actually explain a lot of the other pre-earthquake research stuff. And trees in their root system turn out making a great way to measure the currents going on in the earth that can be affected by this. And a guy in Japan has actually already proven the concept and actually shown that by measuring changes in tree potentials. So we have 2 channels in our tree system, one that measures the ground and one across the tree, that before larger earthquakes, the tree potentials change about 2 weeks before the earthquake occurs. So anyway, we'll see. That's another factor. And do trees communicate energetically with each other over long distances? And how do the biofield of trees have an uplifting effect on people? Anyway, that's the things we're interested in and looking at. So if you're interested in that, the website's there. You can go check it out, treerhythms.net. If you'd like to, anybody that's here or watching this want to host if you have a tree, a favorite tree that's on your property. I get people asking me, can I put one in our park? No, it needs to be on, really should be something that's secured on your own property. But anyway, there's a website to learn all about it and learn how to become a host. So this is I'm going to end it here, but basically I'd just like to say that from my perspective, we really are at a point in the history of the evolution of consciousness where we're in the middle of making a shift, our next leap to a more cooperative and collaborative world. And we get there by feeding the field, if you will, with more love and compassion and care for each other. So I'm going to end it with that. And,
Okay. Thank you very much for all these very many aspects of with the focus of the heart. I like that. Also, I've noticed that coherence is a very significant characteristic in this research. I also happen to be rather interested in the biofield myself, and also during recent months I have come across the interest in plants and trees having some kind of consciousness, having memory, etc. So both electrical life, but also some kind of consciousness or intelligence.
I would agree. Yeah.
You have noticed that too?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's well, you probably, if you're following that world, the new generation of plant biologists are really doing some really neat work. And I don't know if you follow it or not, but there's kind of a major split going on, the old guard and the new guard.
Yeah.
The new guard is talking about plant consciousness and plant intelligence.
Yeah.
And the old guard is saying, no, I can't be get neurons to be conscious and have intelligence. And they're saying, well, no, you don't. There's another type of intelligence and consciousness. And like this demonstrating memory in mimosa plants and Susan Simard's work on the mother tree, and they recognize their kin, and a lot of really neat stuff at the biochemical level.
Yeah.
And the coordinated behavior, but very little, surprisingly little has been done looking at the electrical, some, but nowhere near as much looking at the electrical activity. And it's I live in the forest here, the redwood forest, and I've seen this twice, really in my life, but in the last 5 years, where you just happen to be out and where a tree releases its pollen all at once. There is an obvious coordinated behavior. It's amazing to see this, like the tree explodes and you see the pollen released in this giant cloud all at once from the tree. It's an amazing thing to see. So how the heck does a tree coordinate that kind of a completely coordinated release like that, without some type of, coordinated behavior and signaling process? Yeah.
That's that's a new challenge for biology. Really. Okay. Do we have any questions? We are rather few people, so I think we can just try to speak out, whoever there may be.
I would like to continue this same theme when it comes to like trees. I was watching this documentary, and they're trying to explain how the Amazon could actually exist, because all the trees in there, they let some of the water out, and they do it when they synchronize it. That is causing all this moist, and that moist then causes the rainfall to come. So it's sort of like so it works for the total forest at the same time. But if one single tree would do this, it would die, because it wouldn't be surviving. Because it has to be synchronized, and that becomes rainfall. So they're trying to figure out what's going on here? How do they synchronize in this? Because when the first tree started doing it, that tree would have died because it would be like, you know, an advantage situation. So I think interesting.
You know, I love your comment. I think that, well, obviously plants and trees have been around a lot longer than we have. And I think we have a lot to learn from them in terms of, if I had to, you know, say anything about what's the main frequency of plant life, it's thriving. They thrive. I mean, we were part of I don't know if you follow what's going on in California or drought stuff, but we had one of the largest, one of the 10 most destructive fires in California's history was here in my area. In fact, burned right. A lot of our employees lost houses and things here in our area 2 years ago. I called the CZD fire, a huge fire. And a year later, to see what the forest has done and literally thriving and recovering, it's amazing to see how fast nature, recovers and cooperates. So in terms of the intelligence and cooperation that nature has, it's we have a lot to learn there of how to get along with each other. I think that we could learn. Now, another friend of mine that he passed away probably, horrible with time, about 10 years ago now, was Cleve Baxter. I don't know if you guys know Cleve or not. Cleve hung out here a lot. There was a book in the 80s, I think, late 70s or early 80s. Secret Life of Plants was the name of it. That was all based on Cleve's work.
Yeah.
We replicated a lot of Cleve stuff here in our lab, kind of secretly behind the scenes, and because he was the first to come out and really say that, hey, plants sense human emotions. They have intelligence, and they prefer classical music and all the stuff that Cleve was talking about.
Yeah. So you replicated some of his work.
Yeah, we did quite a bit of it, actually. I mean, he hung out here a lot and he showed us how to do it, so it was easy, and learned a lot about what not to do and what not to expect.
Okay. Yes. Anybody else? No.
Well, I guess we can call it a day then.
Okay.
Well, was this? Hopefully, this was interesting to you guys and useful. So
That was very nice. I had loads of questions written up here on my notes, but I realized I was writing it in a way I couldn't read it.
I'm the same way.
I'll have to look into it.
You sound like me, Alf. I do this.
Well, you mentioned many details, but I think it was very valuable to notice them, Rollin, and we may recall them afterwards. And
if you want the gory details of anything, it's all, you can go to our website, heartmap.org. There's a research library. I mean, the stuff's all published. And
yeah. But the role for the heart in connecting to this general field is of interest.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, of course, noticed that there are many in our area that talk about some kind of field for consciousness, mm-hmm. whatever characteristics and how to prove it. But I mean, many people assume there is some kind of field for consciousness.
Well, it's got to be some kind of organizing field.
Yeah.
I mean, that's quantum dynamic theory. Quantum dynamics. Yeah.
Yes, quantum is rather often mentioned, and I also noticed the biofield people talk about an organizing field. Sure. It's about the same kind of idea. Yeah. But so there may be some kind, or they interact perhaps also.
We don't understand how yet, but I think there has to be. And you probably knew May Wan Ho's work then. Are you familiar with?
Yeah. So I'm quite also for healing. It seems to be involved with the biofield, connecting over distances, and also for local phenomena. It's involved. So quite interesting. Yes. Okay.
And Michael Levin's doing some good work. You probably know his work. He's another U.S. guy on the East Coast. that is showing if you in embryonic development, if you change, you can if you change the field, you change development.
Yeah, Michael Levin. Yes, I know.
Yeah.
I recognize his name. Yes, yes. Okay. Okay. So if we don't have any more questions, I would just tell you we appreciated you could be with us and share your research.
My pleasure. I appreciate the invitation.
Okay. Okay. So many thanks.
Take care.